So here we find Lord Kapila is explaining different kinds of mixed devotional service. So earlier, as Prabhupada also points out in this purport, in the earlier chapter also, what is pure devotional service was explained. And one of the very important features of the devotional service which is pure is the mind of the Supreme Lord and the mind of devotee is completely dovetailed. There is no difference in the mentality of the Supreme Lord and in the mentality of a devotee. So that was pure devotional service. When it is not pure, when our mind, our desires are not aligned with the desire of the Supreme Lord, then it manifests in different varieties of mixed devotional service. Like earlier to this we saw, it manifests in the form of violence, anger, enviousness towards other living entities. All these are interests which are not aligned with the Supreme Lord. These are interests which are separate from the Supreme Lord. His mentality is completely against the will of the Supreme Lord. So, if you notice this, in the last verse and in this verse, 2 times this different words has been used about such mixed devotional service. Bhinnadrik and Prathak Bhavaha. In the earlier verse, it was called Bhinnadrik. And in today's verse, it is called Prathak Bhavaha. He has a separate mentality. Bhinnadrik, he sees differently, not as the Supreme Lord sees. So these are all mixed devotional service. Prabhupada very nicely translates this as separatist, one who has a separate interest than that of the Supreme Lord. So, what does he do as it is defined in today's words? Archa adau archayet. He may worship the Archa Vigraha of the Supreme Lord and Adau and many other things like this which are part of devotional service. So the worship of deities in the temple, Yah Mam Prathak Bhavaha. But even though he is worshipping the deities in the temple, he has Prathak Bhava. His mentality is completely separate from my understanding. Prathak Bhavaha. And because of that, what happens? Because he has a separate mentality, Abhisandhaya, his motive is different. His goal of performing devotional service is different. It is not to please me. It is something different. What all? Vishayan. He wants material enjoyment by performing devotional service. Yashaha. He wants to become famous by becoming a great devotee, by performing devotional service. He wants fame. Aishwaryam. And he wants to become materially very opulent. So this kind of devotional service, Saha Rajasaha, it is in the mode of passion. So Prabhupada very nicely explains about this. What is the mentality of this kind of devotee? He is not thinking that actually by my service I should be satisfying the Supreme Lord. Rather, he is thinking Supreme Lord should keep on supplying as the devotee demands. That means the Supreme Lord is order carrier of the devotee. No doubt, out of pure love, the Lord does carry out the orders of his pure devotee. But the devotee never has this mentality. He never has this mentality. He is not thinking that I have varieties of desires and the Supreme Lord should supply all these desires of mine. What is the difference between karmis and devotees then? The Lord supplies the orders of living entity in this material world. Through Paramatma, he sanctions varieties of desire according to their karma, impersonally by material energy. The Lord, whatever is desired by the living entity, if he deserves, the Supreme Lord does provide, he sanctions. And with the same mentality, if a devotee is also approaching the Supreme Lord for some material benefit rather than satisfying the Supreme Lord, then actually it is not something, high standard of devotional service. Just like in the last verse, Prabhupada translate, it is the lowest mode of worshipping the Supreme Lord. So, one of the very important features, that is why Prabhupada explains in many places, devotee is more interested in serving the Supreme Lord by becoming the father of the Supreme Lord rather than becoming the son of the Supreme Lord. There is no doubt, Krishna is Aham Bija Pradapitaha. He is the father of all living entities. But it's very interesting to understand, when the child is in immature stage, he is always asking father. He is always asking his parents, give me this, give me this, give me this. Always demand. So this father concept is always with demand. That is how we find even in Christianity. They go to the church, God, give us our daily bread. Isn't it? So this is very preliminary mode of worshipping the Supreme Lord. So Prabhupada explains, just like even in a household, when the child grows and he becomes mature, then he thinks, what is this nonsense? I am always asking, give me this, give me this. I should serve. And then he goes and asks, Father, how can I serve you? You see? So, this mode, that is why devotee prefers to become father of the Supreme Lord, so that he can give and render service. Because the son is generally dependent on the father, and Yashoda Mai is serving the Supreme Lord with that understanding that the Supreme Lord is dependent on me. If I don't feed him nicely, Krishna may fall sick. And with utmost care, she wants to give the best to Krishna. And that is why Mother Yashoda was always thinking that looks like I am not preparing the best of the butters, otherwise why Krishna is going to others' house? So this is the understanding, she wants to give the best. So it is not pure devotion when God is thought to be like order supplier, and Prabhupada is saying, he is thinking like this: interest of Lord is to supply orders of devotees, and interest of devotees to draw from the Lord as much as possible for sense gratification. Prabhupada defines this is separatist mentality. In the previous verse also we saw separatist mentality, isn't it? He is envious of other devotees, he is angry at others, does not treat other living entities properly, isn't it? That is also separatist mentality, because that is not aligned with the interest of the Lord. It is very important to align ourselves with the interest of the Lord. So what happens because of this? Then he is thinking, because the Lord is the order supplier, so he is thinking of varieties of things by performing devotional service, like Vishayan, satisfying my senses. It is possible, very much possible, we find. Somebody may think that outside I'll have to work hard, struggle hard. Here in Krishna consciousness, I'll simply chant, dance, and I will get all kind of sense enjoyment, Vishayan. Somebody may come with that mentality, thinking. And even in devotional service, one may think, I want to become famous, Yashaha, isn't it? Opulence, Aishwaryam. So, when a devotee is behind all these things, then one should understand his mentality is separate, his interest is different from the Supreme Lord. And that is why he is aspiring for all these things. These are all anarthas. Lord does not want, because till we have a tinge of these interest separate from the Lord, we will have to stay back in this material world. The Lord does not want that. So we have to align our interest with the interest of the Supreme Lord. This is very important. So when I was reading Dhruva Maharaj's story, one very beautiful subject matter is highlighted. Prabhupada highlights it. This is the beauty of Srila Prabhupada. Very beautifully he highlights the various aspects of devotional service in his purports. Otherwise, which we will miss. I was really surprised to see how Prabhupada very beautifully brings about this such an important point. What happened was, Dhruva Maharaj, after ruling, when he had seen the Supreme Lord face to face, and for 36,000 years he ruled this earth. So after the end of this, Dhruva Maharaj became detached from everything. He was able to realize that everything is creation of illusion. I had to carry out my duty, I carried out, that material duty is over now. And he realized that everything is creation of the Supreme Lord's Maya to entangle the living entities. So very soon he gave up all those things. And like earlier, when he was at the age of 5, he had left for Madhuvan at that time. This time he left for Badrika Ashram. So he gave up everything and he went to Himalayas, Badrika Ashram. And he was already practiced to meditate on the Supreme Lord when he was a child. So it was not difficult for him to meditate on the Supreme Lord. Very soon he became absorbed in the thoughts of the Lord. and tears started flowing constantly from his eyes. His body started shivering. That is called Ashta Sattvika Vikara. His body became transformed in 8 different ways, which are devotional ecstasies. Hairs were standing on his end. And then, suddenly, he saw that one plane has descended from the sky. And this plane was as effulgent like the full moon, and it descends. And then suddenly he sees that there are 2 very, very brilliant personalities who are approaching him from the plane. And he saw that they are the order carriers of the Supreme Lord. They are partials, associates of the Supreme Lord, Nanda and Sunanda, very confidential servants of the Supreme Lord. So then, suddenly, because they just came in front of him, he was bewildered. He did not know how to receive them. Sometime it happens. That is why in Sanskrit, guest is called Atithi. Atithi means one who has no fixed time, no fixed date. Anytime he can appear. So like a Vishesh Atithi, special guest, Nanda and Sunanda appeared, and Dhruva Maharaj did not know what to do. So he simply offered his obeisances and started chanting the holy name of the Lord. And Prabhupada brings out a point very beautifully, that actually even in such awkward circumstances, when a devotee does not know how to satisfy the Lord or the associate of the Lord, if he simply chants the holy name of the Lord, everything will become perfect. This awkward situation will become perfect. And that is exactly what Dhruva Maharaj did. And Prabhupada says devotees are accustomed. That is why in every circumstance, either in danger or in happiness, to always constantly chant the holy name of the Lord. And Prabhupada says, when in danger, when a devotee chants the holy name of the Lord, immediately everything will become perfect, danger will disappear. And in happiness like this, when he sees the associate of the Lord, immediately even the associate of the Lord are completely satisfied by just hearing the glories of the Supreme Lord. So Nanda and Sunanda were completely satisfied. And it is said, so when Dhruva Maharaj was paying his obeisances, they were approaching. Dhruva Maharaj got up and just bowed his head down, and with folded hand he was waiting for them. Then Nanda and Sunanda approached Dhruva Maharaj. There it is said about Nanda and Sunanda, Pushkar Nabha Sammatau. Pushkar Nabha is another name of the Supreme Lord. One who has lotus navel. That is one of the names of the Supreme Lord. Pankaj Nabha, Pushkar Nabha, like that. So, Sammatau means, Prabhupada explains so nicely, beautifully, that these 2 servants of the Lord are very confidential servitors of the Lord, because Sammatau, they are completely in agreement with the Supreme Lord. Sammatau, Sammati, we say, completely in agreement with the Supreme Lord. This is the feature of Vaikuntha. Every living entity is in one with interest with the Supreme Lord. If you all remember, the 4 Kumaras cursed Jaya and Vijaya, thinking that you have a separatist mentality. This is not the mentality of the Supreme Lord. So you don't deserve to be in Vaikuntha. You deserve to go to the material world. You see. So, in the material world, everyone is asammatau, bhinnadrak, prathak bhavaha. Everyone has separate mentality from the Supreme Lord. This is the difference. So, Prabhupada says, this Krishna consciousness movement is meant for making people agreeable to the orders of the Lord. And the orders of the Lord, the desires of the Lord are available in Bhagavad Gita. It is available in Srimad Bhagavatam. What is the mentality of the Lord? We can get glimpse of that from Bhagavatam, from Bhagavad Gita. What does the Lord desire? So it is so beautifully, in these varieties of dealings the Lord has with His devotees, one can understand the interest of the Supreme Lord. So Prabhupada explains further in that purport that it was because of Sammatau being agreeable to the desires of the Supreme Lord, Dhruva Maharaj was able to please the Supreme Lord completely. We understand this, that even when in devotional service Dhruva Maharaj was somehow or other distracted because of his own anartha. Of course, Prabhupada explains it is just an example to make us understand, wherein indiscriminately he was killing the yakshas. The Lord personally said, it was the arrangement of the Lord, that great sages and Swayambhu Manu approached, that my devotee should not become bewildered and astray away from my interest. And all these great personalities and Swayambhu Manu explained the interest of the Lord very beautifully. So I'll just cite some 2-3 interesting verses which Swayambhu Manu explains very beautifully, that this is what the Lord wants. You should not astray away from that understanding. So he said, one should not accept the body as the self, and thus, like animal, kill the bodies of others. This is specially forbidden for saintly persons who are devotees. See, okay, for others also the Lord desires that they should not accept this material body. What can be done? Materialistic people, they are thinking they are this material body. But for devotees, the Lord does not desire that devotee should think I am this material body. And then thus because of that he will act like an animal. Animal, what is he thinking? Other bodies are my food. And he wants to eat them for sense enjoyment. So devotee should not act like that. And the word used by Swayambhu Manu is Sadhunam Rishikesha Anuvartinam. Who is sadhu? Who are those devotees from whom the Lord is expecting that they should not act on bodily platform like animals? Sadhunam Rishikesha Anuvartinam, those who are surrendered to the Supreme Lord Rishikesha, who are following the orders of the Supreme Lord. So, this is one very important thing which Swayambhu Manu told. Next, Swayambhu Manu told, my dear Dhruva, it is very difficult to attain the audience of the Supreme Lord personally. What to speak about going back to Godhead? But you are destined to go as the Lord desired. So we all know the Supreme Lord gave him that benediction. After the end of your life, you will come back to me. So you are already destined to go. How? He says, by worshipping the Supreme Lord, who is Bhutavasa. He is the supreme abode of all living entities. So Prabhupada explains in two ways. Dhruva should have understood that if the Supreme Lord is Bhutavasa, He is the supreme abode of all living entities, how He can be envious of some living entity? How He should be envious? Isn't it? The Lord is Bhutavasa. He is the Ashraya, He is the shelter of all living entities. Next, another understanding Bhutavasa Prabhupada explains is the Supreme Lord is also present in every living entity. He is the shelter of everyone and He is present in every living entity. So every body is like a temple of the Lord. So He should have that respect for all living entities. You see, you can imagine what kind of teachings Swayambhu Manu gave to align Dhruva Maharaj with the mentality and interest of the Supreme Lord. And then finally the same verse which we had spoken earlier, he said, because you are pure devotee of the Lord, Lord is always thinking about you. As you are thinking about the Lord, you should understand Lord is always thinking about you. He is also worrying. He does not want my devotee should astray. And he says that is why two very important things he pointed out. You are a recognized devotee by many other stalwart devotees. Narada, he recognizes you as a pure devotee of the Lord. Many other great stalwart devotees recognize you as a great devotee of the Lord. So you have a great responsibility. Your life is meant for exemplary behavior. Because of your behavior, people should not point out what devotee he was, how he acted. Isn't it? So your life is meant for exemplary behavior. So you should align yourself properly. And then finally, we all know that he spoke that same verse, saying the Lord is very satisfied when He sees how a devotee behaves with varieties of living entity, with titiksha, to the envious, He is tolerant. Maitreya, to the devotees, He is always in friendship, and to everybody in general. And to ignorant people, Karunaya, He is very, very merciful. And Samanatvam, He sees with equal vision every living entities. So with this we'll stop. Granthara Srimad Bhagavatam ki jai. Jagat Guru Srila Prabhupada.